I had a dream last night. Oh, it was a strange dream, I can tell you, but it was sort of somehow relevant to today. I thought I'd share it with you. Hope you don't mind. So in the dream, I'm sitting here in this chair, minding my own business of an evening by the fireside, kicking back, and I noticed there was a newspaper on the table. Now, I don't normally read newspapers. I don't get newspapers. I don't watch the television. I don't entertain the mainstream media. But I thought, oh, well, let's have a look and see what's in the paper as it's there. And I picked it up and I had a look. And there was this headline saying that there was a shortage of sledgehammers, and that people were very upset that there was a shortage of sledgehammers. And I thought to myself, that's a bit peculiar. You know how dreams are. So anyway, I carried on reading, and yes, there were these hardware stores up and down the countryside saying there had been people banging on the doors saying, excuse me, could I buy a sledgehammer? And the proprietor had to come down, sometimes in the middle of the night, open the door and said, can I help you? Want a sledgehammer? I said, no, we haven't got any sledgehammers. We've sold out. Sold out? Oh, blimey, where's the next hardware store? I need to get a sledgehammer. And then there were requests for pickaxes as well. And the poor old proprietors of these hardware stores, you know, in their corner of little streets were saying, no, we haven't got any pickaxes either. They seem to have run out. There seems to be a good old run on them. And there were more people hurtling down the street saying, excuse me, have you got pickaxe? No, I haven't got any of those. And he slammed the door. Well, it was fascinating in this paper reading about that, and I thought, I wonder why there could possibly be a shortage of sledgehammers and pickaxes. So I thought maybe I better turn on the television and find out what's on mainstream media. But of course I don't have a television because I don't like the bias that comes in and all the lies and all the deception. And so I went to my neighbour next door and I knocked on his door and I said, excuse me, would you mind if I watched your television, because I'm very interested to see why there's a shortage of sledgehammers. And he said, well, to be honest with you, if I had a sledgehammer, I'd be putting it through the television. The mainstream media is so full of guff. He said, but I do have a television, but it's locked away. Anyway, we went up into the loft and we wrestled this thing down and we plugged it in and we got the old valves warming up, and eventually there it was. And we tuned it in the old-fashioned way, a bit of UHF. And there was one of the mainstream media programs, and it had and we were waiting to see if there would be a thing about sledgehammers being, you know, on the not being in existence, and everybody had taken them. But as it happened, there was a bloke sitting there in some news studio with music blasting that really sort of got the emotion going, and you were going, oh my goodness. And there were all these flashy graphics that absorbed the brain, and you felt like you were being sucked into some special magic story. And there were these little tweets, they called them, little tweets with words written on them, and they were flying up the screen, and the guy was saying something about them, how outraged people were and how terrible it was that these tweets had been released into the public domain. And I noticed on the tweets there was a picture of a chap, a little smiley chap who was next to the words and all his strange words. And I thought, hang on a minute, I recognise him. I had to search my brain and thought, I know who he is. He's the former health secretary, isn't he? Isn't he the bloke who was in charge during those terrible years, the pandemic years? That's right, of course. So I was very intrigued. So I sat there with my neighbour. We sat there and we read some of these tweets. And one of them said something about frightening the pants off people. This was this chap, Matt, whatever his name was, the former health secretary, was going to frighten the pants off people. And we thought, oh, is that what they were saying behind the scenes? When can we release the next variant? I thought, what do you mean? Deploy it? Like what? Like a bomb or something? Anyway, it was very peculiar hearing all of this, and I thought, oh, and it reminded me of that time, because I thought I'd pretty much forgotten about it, to be honest with you. Because there wasn't just that Matt bloke, there was another one, wasn't there? There was three of them all told, as I remember. There was, that funny dishevelled looking bloke who never combed his hair with a Russian sounding name. What was his name now? Bergy? No, not Bergy. Busis? No, not Busis. Boris. That was his name, yeah. And wasn't he the head honcho at the time? I think he had a very pivotal role. Used to come out and stand behind a podium and tell everybody how many people had died. And then you were all going to lock up and everything like that. You all had to stay indoors. Never mind that the kids needed to go to school, or that people were getting a little bit fraught and suicidal. And then there was his mate who was in charge of the money, if I remember rightly. People used to say he was a bit fishy, or was it that he was dishy? Can't remember his his name, insignificant sort of bloke, seemed to have more money than God, or at least his wife did. I can't remember how it worked. Anyway, he had a lot of cash, and for some reason between the two of them, they were saying, you've got to stay at home because there's this dreadful illness spreading the land, and everyone stayed in. And then, of course, as a result of that, we ended up in a financial crisis, as I remember. Terrible situation. These three, and wasn't it the same three that not only were frightening the pants off us, along with the mainstream media, of course, they were also, it seems to be, complicit with it, as I remember it, getting everybody absolutely nervous and all that. You couldn't go outside, and the police were involved, and I think the army at some point, and there were drones flying about. Should you step outside or sit down on a park bench or even have a cup of coffee in public, have a little bit of vitamin D from the sunshine? And as I remember, you weren't allowed to even go to hospital if you had this strange illness, which seemed to be the reverse of what normally would happen if you had a little spot or a little blob of something and you think, oh, that doesn't look good. I normally go to my doctor and then to the hospital and have it checked out because the earlier the intervention was, the better for you. But no, I seem to remember they didn't want you anywhere near the hospitals because the nurses were too busy practicing their dance routines, if I remember rightly. That's it, that's how it went. And then later on, as we were emerging out of our houses, somewhat like moles with big eyes going, blimey, it's bright out here, there were all these people with big syringes saying, no, we've got this magic cure, you'll be all right here. Straight up the old backside. Woo, that felt good. Yes, and so people were cajoled, and if I remember rightly, they were really mean about getting you this thing, this magical cure, into you. But of course, the moment people started to sort of feel a bit rough and a bit ill, or were throwing up, or had a seizure, or they had a stroke, or they actually snuffed it, for some reason, these three characters, oh no, nothing to see here, nothing to do with us, oh blimey, no thank you. Even that Matt one, who was laughing and jeering and being very nasty to people. Anyway, so that was all out. We were watching these tweets going up, thinking this is a very strange old thing. And I said, but it still hasn't said why there's no sledgehammers. And then there was a knock at the door, and somebody came to the door, and my neighbour went and opened the door, and it was another chap, and there was hundreds of them outside, hundreds of them people outside his house with sledgehammers and pickaxes. And they said, aren't you coming? So we looked at them and said, well, where are you going? We're going down to the Houses of Parliament. Oh, are you? This was all in the dream. Bear in mind, it's just a dream. It's not reality. And I thought to myself, oh, come on then. We'll go down and see what they're doing. So we followed them in this long march, and there were thousands. No wonder there was no sledgehammers, because everybody had been buying them up. Pickaxes, sledgehammers, even people with forks, you know, the old pitchforks. So we followed them down to the Houses of Parliament, and there were millions of them, all of them swinging their pickaxes and swinging their sledgehammers, and there was this huge din as the metal was hitting masonry, and there were bricks coming down, and poor old Big Ben was wobbling like this, and there you saw these MPs, they were scuttling out like scared, do you know what? Goodness gracious, scrabbling away. Nobody was actually after them, but they were knocking down the building, knocking the building down. I said, why are we doing this? And there was a big bloke, big hefty bloke in a big crane, and he was turning this thing round, had a massive great metal ball on it that was swinging away, bashing into the walls, and down came more things. And he said, we're fed up. We're fed up. These tweets have revealed exactly what the government is like. Exactly what they're like. They live in this place called Parliament. He says, do you speak French? I said, no, not really. He said, parler. That means to talk. Ment. That means to lie. I said, oh, what do you mean? He said, they've been telling us lies. They're always telling us lies. Lie after lie after lie. And do you know what? We've been paying for it. We pay them to lie to us. Well, we've had enough. Now there's these revealing tweets that have come out and shown how it's like. We don't want this anymore. And there was cheers, cheers for this big bloke and his swinging ball. And I thought to myself, well, he's got a point, isn't he? He's got a point in the dream, you understand, just a dream, that how can it be that there we are paying our taxes, paying for these MPs to be sitting there and lying to us, locking up in our houses, injecting us with something that actually was knocking a lot of people out and making them fall over and very, very ill, didn't want to address it, didn't want to talk about it. And so people had decided to actually get off their fat arses and make their way down to the Houses of Parliament and actually get rid of the government parliament altogether. I thought, well, that's something. Of course, in the real world, I was aware in my dream that most people would be just looking at the paper going, oh dear, isn't that terrible? And then they'd switch on the television and just get lost, because most people seem to have switched off and not really bothered about what's really going on in the world. And I thought that was very strange. So I said, what are you going to do then? What are you going to do without this? And somebody said, have you heard of common law? We're going to get back to the old common law, the system where you don't have statutes and acts. Think about it, acts, acting. It's all acting, it's all smoke and mirrors, it's all lies. They've been lying to us. We're getting rid of all of that. And I thought, well, that would be good. Get back to the old trial by jury, in which 12 just men will look at what you've done and decide whether it's right, that it's benevolent, that it's do no harm, do no evil, do nothing bad, just live nicely. Because I thought, do you know what? Actually, that's quite true. The government just seemed to have been penalising us by bringing in these terrible things like 15-minute cities and digital banks, digital currency, or central banks, digital currency, and ID cards. You think, when did the Parliament, when did the government, when did that benevolent Parliament and that government and those people who say they're in charge actually do something for us, actually for free, actually good? When did they say, do you know what, because we're in charge, we've managed to ruffle things around and we're going to take off fuel duty. We're not going to go towards net zero because that's very penal. We're not going to lie to you about climate change and say the world is going to come to an end. We're not going to do that. We're actually going to do something for your benefit. But in my dream, as I was snoozing away, having this dream, thinking about all these people bashing down the old Houses of Parliament, it did occur to me that that's never really happened. The government always seem to lie to us, don't they? They never actually do anything beneficial to us. They never really help us. To be honest, I didn't really know what they were there for. It seemed to be that they were a waste of time, a waste of space, earning lots of money, arguing among themselves, basically to do us harm. And I thought that's not really in line with the common law. And so I thought in my dream it would be good to get that sledgehammer and bash it away and get rid of it. And once you've dealt with the old Boris bloke and that Matt bloke and that other one, the chap who's now the Prime Minister, Rishi, that's his name, and you've built the scaffold and you've said goodbye to them, maybe if people were to manage themselves and not get involved in all that sort of tyranny, we could actually be happy.